The next presentation will be by Jens de Hasseleer, and he will take us on a Bumblebee trip to Belgium. Jens, are you ready to start?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So please share your screen.
So, you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible, and you're good to hear. So, yeah.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Jens de Hasseleer, and together with my colleague Peter van Ormelingen, I'm working as a biologist at Natuurpunt. That's the biggest nature conservation NGO from Flanders in the northern part of Belgium. We're specialized in IDing wild bees and doing inventories on wild bees in Belgium. Today, I'm going to show you some results on the research that has been done into the distribution of rare Belgian species and also the conservation efforts. So in Belgium, we have a long time data set on bumblebees, luckily for us. So in the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of data was collected by naturalists like, for instance, Ball, which gives us a good idea of the species distribution from around 100 years ago. As you can see, this period was followed by a large knowledge gap up until the 1980s, when now Professor Rasmon from the University of Mons collected lots of data. And finally, the last 10 to 20 years, due to citizen science projects, our knowledge of distribution of bumblebee species rose again to an all-time high. If we have a quick look at the spatial distribution of the data, we see some big differences in the collection efforts throughout time. So these maps show Belgium and part of northern France, and every dot represents a 5 to 5 kilometer square. In the first time period, that's the red dots, we see that data were collected from over the whole country, while in the second time period, so that's the yellow dots, the focus was mainly on Wallonia, so the southern part of Belgium. And in the last time period, again, so the last 20 years or something, that's the green dots. We see that the spatial distribution, again, is more even throughout the whole country. So all this data gives us a very good idea on the status of our bumblebees. And it's not very, I don't have any good news, unfortunately, because only 1/5 of our species has not been threatened so far. So this means that actually 80% of our species have been threatened in some way. 1/5 of the species has already disappeared from the country, and 1/5 is critically endangered, and so the rest of the species are in some way threatened. And so this shows that the situation in Belgium is as bad as the situation in other Northwest European countries. If you compare the regional diversity of bumblebees between the time periods, we see that the diversity has severely dropped in almost everywhere. In the past, even regions like the now densely populated area of Brussels, so in the middle of the country, had over 20 bumblebee species, while now this has decreased until up until 10 to 15 species, let's say. We also see that in the most recent time period, so that's on the right map, the map on the right, the highest class, so it means the class with over 20 bumblebee species, has completely vanished. So in recent times, we only have a few species-rich areas which remain, for instance, the area of the Hageland and the Campines in Flanders, and then the Lyme region and the Gome or the Deep South in Wallonia. So luckily, like I said, luckily we still have some rare bees or rare bumblebees who are left. And if you have a look at these endangered species, we see that they have a lot in common. All of them have a relatively long tongue, and so therefore a strong preference for plant species with a long corolla, like mainly Fabacea, but also plant species from the Lamiacea, the Orobankacea, and the Boraginaceae. They also prefer mainly open landscapes, and the queens are only active in late spring, stressing the need for a long flowering period, especially during the summer months when most meadows and roadsides are typically mown. And one of the main reasons, this is probably known by everyone who is following this course or this symposium, is that one of the main reasons for decline of our rare bumblebees is, of course, agricultural intensification. So the area on the lower left corner, you see that the area of cultivated Fabaceae has dropped severely, especially after World War I, due to the use of artificial fertilizers. Well, actually, these were the Fabaceae were replaced by the artificial fertilizers, but also due to the use of these fertilizers, the nitrogen levels throughout the whole country have risen dramatically, and in combination with bad management of roadsides and natural grasslands, our plant availability for bumblebees, especially the rare ones, has plummeted. I promised Linde to use some nice pictures of bumblebees. So Linde, this one is for you. We see some of the species that rely heavily on flower-rich grasslands and that have become very rare and that still cling on and haven't completely disappeared so far. I put 4 species of them on this screen, which is the red-shanked carder bee, Bombus ruderarius, in the upper left corner, the brown-banded carder bee in upper right corner, so that's Bombus humilis, the shrill carder bee, Bombus silvarum, in the lower left corner, and the sand-colored carder bee, Bombus veteranus, in the lower right corner. In a moment, we will have a look at a few case studies of these species. So I quickly repeat that our historical knowledge was mainly based on old school naturalists like Ball, who collected nearly every bumblebee that they encountered. So we have a lot of old collections in Belgium, followed by research done by universities, mainly the University of Mons. But our recent knowledge on bumblebee distribution is mainly thanks to citizen science projects. And that's where myself and my colleagues of Natuurpunt, together with our working group Aquilia, our bee working group Aquilia, and our sister organization Natagora in the south, where we come in play. So lots of volunteers put their observations on the online database observations.be, so waarnemingen.be in Dutch. But we know that not all bumblebee species are as easy to ID, and we also know that the level of our volunteers, the ID skill level, is not that high always. So we try to train our volunteers, and we also ask them to make good macro photos. And the last 10 to 20 years, we have seen that a lot of very good macro photos exist. So for instance, nowadays we are able to see the punctuation on the sternids and also the length of antennal segments due to this revolution. And we try, of course, to use the knowledge on the recent distribution and the ecology to improve the management to try to maintain these rare and declining species. First up is the sand-colored carder bee. We see here the maps on observation.be, and so we see that our recent, due to some recent efforts, we see that our knowledge of the distribution has risen. The dot in the center is an old record from, I think, the 1950s or something. But so recently we see that the species only has been found in the deep south of Wallonia. But if we compare this with the maps of the whole time period, so let's say the last 100 years, then we see that the species has disappeared from substantial portions of its historical range. So that's the red and the yellow dots, and so leaving only that those most southern populations in the Gom. That's the green dots. In that area, so that's called the Gom, which has a rather intact landscape with lots of hedges, natural grasslands, marshlands. A live project has taken place. It's called Live Herbage, and that's a project in which our sister organization Natagora was a part in. And over 600 hectares, mainly grasslands, were restored. So in here you see an example of one of the restored grasslands with lots and lots of Fabaceae. In this picture alone, I think you can see over 6 species of Fabaceae, so very important for this rare bumblebee species. And our Flemish group of Aquilia has visited area has visited the whole area and the whole Lijfherbage area in recent years, and we have discovered, besides lots of other rare species, of course, some remaining populations of the sand color bumblebee. And so we know that this project has worked. So this is very good news for the Lijfherbage project and also for our sister organization, Natagora. Of course, this restoration needs to take place on a landscape scale, since bumblebees have a rather large range and they need a lot of flower resources. And so the next example I'm going to show you is one from Flanders, of the nature reserve, one of the nature reserves of Natuurpunt called Rosdel, a nature reserve where my colleague Peter is also active as a volunteer in the management of the nature reserve. This nature reserve was only founded 20 years ago in a quite intensive agricultural landscape. And for instance, this picture here with a sea of flowers, that shows you one of the recent reformed areas, which was formerly an agricultural field and now has become a natural flower-rich grassland. Again, this is another example of that same area. And in the summer of 2019, my colleague Peter caught an odd bumblebee while doing research on other bee species. And it was only 1 year later when he examined the specimen that he discovered that this was the male of a moss carder bee, Bombus muscorum, a species so rare in Belgium that actually this observation was the first and only recent Flemish observation, with only one other observation or one other population in recent years in Wallonia, somewhere in the province of Namen. So actually this shows that the management of nature reserve and restoration of flower-rich grasslands on a landscape scale might help even our rarest of bees. And of course, it's an amazing incentive for the local volunteers that help with management and monitoring of these species. In that nature reserve, not only the extremely rare moss carder bee was found, but also other rare bumblebee species like, for instance, the ruderal bumblebee and cryptic white-tailed bumblebee. And on the picture you see Peter, who just found, I think, one of those two species. As a last example, I'd like to talk about red-shanked carder bee, and the map here shows you that the current known distribution of red-shanked carder bee, this shows the current distribution. And we see that over the last years, our knowledge has greatly improved, especially, actually both in Flanders, so in the Polder region near the coast, but also in Wallonia. And we see that it can only be found in two regions, mainly the coastal region in Flanders and then the Lyme region and the deep south in Wallonia. But again, if you have a look at the map of the total distribution, so over the last century, we see that the species has disappeared from substantial portions of its historical range. Again, the red and the yellow dots, leaving only a few areas intact. Again, the green dots. But let's focus a bit on the populations in the polder for a moment. So in the context of the Interact project Bespoke, several flower strips consisting of different species of Fabaceae were sown in a very intensive agricultural landscape. And me and my colleagues started a monitoring scheme in these flower strips, and we found lots of foraging workers of the red-shanked carder bee. Luckily for us, and we see that they have been using these flower strips as pollen sources. Of course, this project has to be combined with a lot of extra effort in roadsides and grasslands, and it's important to place the flower strips in the vicinity, preferably maximum 400 meters, of potential nesting sites. And on this picture, you see a potential nesting site, which is a roadside where I actually found a nest of this species. And so that suggests that the project is actually giving positive results and that we have nesting sites very close to newly created foraging sites. So as a quick take-home message, I would like to repeat that although we lost substantial part of our historical bumblebee diversity. Some rare species still remain. Recently, our knowledge on the current distribution of all species, so not just the rare species, but all bumblebee species, has improved a lot, and that's mainly due to citizen science project and the efforts of volunteers. And we also see that nature restoration may help threatened species to remain and to thrive. So I thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you. It's good to see that it's possible to help bumblebees, and that if you do take effort, then it will be helpful. There are several questions. I will try to go there. So one of the questions is by Ben Hargraves, and the question is, were the Bombus cryptarum specimens identified by DNA?
Good question. I don't know. I know of the problems with identification of the Bombus terrestris group as a whole, and we know that we have to re-examine especially the specimens from Cryptarium and the ones from Magnus, but we will do so in the upcoming years for another project, actually. So in a few years, I will have an answer to that.
Okay, there's a more or less similar question by Giannis Anagnostopoulos. How do you account for errors in citizen science data?
Good question. Well, honestly, the maps that I show that I've shown from the rare bumblebees, these data did not just come from, let's say, our basic volunteers, but these were also double checked by specialists like myself. So actually, it's our group of volunteers of, let's say, all levels that go on weekends. Well, actually, that we did before COVID stroke. So we went on weekends. We went on day visits to the south of the country, to some interesting parts in the north of the country. And so it's not just your basic volunteer who have found these species. If we doubt, we double check or triple check all pictures. If we're not sure, we don't account it as a proper sighting. And sometimes, if there is an odd sighting in a region, we actually just send some specialists there to try to re-find the rare bees.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so of course the situation in Belgium is more or less similar as in the Netherlands. That you also use Waarneming.be and we use Waarneming.nl. And one of the things which you see is that many volunteers are submitting pictures, so that makes it possible to check their identification. And that's if you compare it with 10, 20 years ago, it's I think the quality is much higher nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Let's see. There was a question by Nikki Clemens about how the farmers in your case respond to the advice you give them. Are they happy with that, or are they eager to work on bumblebees? Or
well, so this is I think the question is related to the last case I presented. So in the bespoke program, honestly, we were hired to do the monitoring scheme, but our partners at the VLM who work together with the farmers, they have quite good results. So the farmers are happy, although some farmers don't really understand how to maintain the flower strips. But let's say generally they're happy to work with them. They are happy with whatever they receive as compensation. But I think we should still work the next years. We should work to also improve the knowledge on bees and how the flower strips can be important to save these bees. Because I think in the case of the red-shanked carder bee, we will definitely need farmers to cooperate, because otherwise we will probably just lose the species in the polar region. and the whole of Flanders. But so far, so good.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a question myself also. What I see in the Netherlands, it's often difficult to know which species are still present just outside our border. So we know, of course, what the situation is in Belgium, but our access to information for Germany, for instance, across the border, it's more difficult. Do you have the same with Germany, Luxembourg, France? It's difficult to know which species are still present?
Yep, that's. Let me just quickly take a moment to. No, actually, that warming.be and warming.nl, the fact that we have an online, constantly updated distribution atlas, let's say, this is a huge advantage compared to Germany, England, France, where atlases are still made, are still published, are still books, and you still have to wait 10 to 20 years till the next version, till the next update arrives. So I think that's a huge advantage of the online tools that we use. I mean the Belgians and the Dutch, and so I hope that more countries around us will start using them as well. So this will improve the exchange of knowledge, I think, a lot. And I'm aware of the fact that a lot of mistakes might appear. So the maps that I've shown of red-shanked carder, for instance, this is the map of the specimens that were approved. So if you plot the map again, and if you so there's a possibility on the website to tick off or to tick the box only approved data. That shows the actual distribution map, as I've shown you. But of course, there are still some mistakes there, and we as an admin team, we also try to remove the false identification and the false records.
Okay, thank you.